And we are live. It's currently a single pair programming or non-pair programming. It's the 14th of March. My name is Robert. I'm contributing to the social network human connection, and I will implement a disable user feature. So if a user gets disabled, he or she will not be able to log in anymore or make any requests to the backend. The backend will give an unauthenticated error. It's a small thing to do, and I'm gonna share my screen. I have this test here now. So describe logged in is logged in. So that's a query. And depending on some conditions, if the user should be disabled, it should return false. So the user should not be logged in even if he has a valid token, but if the user is disabled in the database, it should not return true, it should return false. And the user therefore is not authenticated. So if we run this test, no. Yeah, I'm now going to stop talking because if I talk, I cannot think anymore. But from here, it should be more or less understandable what I do. Oh. Hi, Abdelani.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. You want to join the Human Connection development?
Yes.
Nice. Have you checked out the code, or do you know what the Human Connection is?
No, I didn't check the code. Matthew showed me how the concept introduced what is human connection, what is the objective of this project.
Yeah.
But I didn't check the code.
Right. So what I'm going to implement now is a feature. So you have your social network, we have our backend and our frontend. We are now working on the backend only.
Okay.
Authentication between frontend and backend happens via JWT. Do you know what JWT is?
No, I didn't.
No problem. So JWT is authentication procedure. Let's close all the tabs, or maybe just close the entire browser. JWT. So it's a particular way of authenticating clients. Clients would mean anything like a mobile client, a web client. And the point here is that you send, along with every request, you send a so-called JWT token.
Okay.
It looks like this. And this is encrypted. It's encrypted asymmetrically. You know what asymmetric encryption means?
Yes. It's like a RSA.
Nice. And so you have a public and private key. Both public and private key are not accessible for the user. At least the private key should not be accessible by the user. So when you log in, you send a valid email password combination. The server with the public key will encrypt some data. And this encrypted data is the token. This token will be on the client. Does it make sense?
Well, yes.
So the client gets the token and nothing else, and he cannot do anything with it but to put it in every request. So you log in once, and then every request you have your token with you. And on every request to the backend, the backend will try to decrypt the token with the private key. Does it make sense?
Yes.
So the encrypted, if that works, the user has a valid token. So the server knows, okay, there must have been some login before, right? Otherwise, the user is not able to encrypt something.
Yes, and he can't generate the token without.
Exactly. The user cannot create any token. And in the encrypted data, you can basically encrypt anything you want. In this case, you have the name and some kind of ID.
Okay.
And then, for example, you can query your database and have a look if this user exists. And you can do many more things, right? So let's say the user, the client had the token, but in the meantime, the user was deleted. Then this additional database call ensures that there is a user after all, for example. But we can do many more things. So as I said, on every on every request, you send this token. And then you can, on the backend side, you can check the database for additional things. And what we want to do is, let's say you have an abusive user. This could be a user who regularly violated community guidelines. So he's posting offensive material and so on. Or let's say you have an abusive user who's an attacker and who wants to try to make, I don't know, script injection or anything. So for security reasons, you came to the conclusion we want to block that particular user.
Okay.
Then the feature is you have a so-called disabled flag on the database. So backend is running at 4,000 usually. I will quickly start the backend. So I'm now in my backend folder and I can run the seeds. This will create some data in the backend. Database will take a couple of minutes. Have you checked out the code already?
No, I didn't.
Oh, no problem. So you can go to human connection /nitro and then /backend. That's the backend code. Send it via Hangouts. All right. And you will get the code, and there are some installation instruction you need. Either you have to use the Docker environment, or you have to install Neo4j database.
I prefer using Docker.
Then you can use Docker, then you will have no problems at all. I'm now having the local installation, so I do have Neo4j up and running, right? So you can see Neo4j is active. And I have the community edition, so that means I can also go to localhost 747, and then I can directly access the database. I can, for example, give all nodes, return all nodes, and get a nice visualization of the seed data. So,
this GraphQL.
That is not GraphQL. This is now just Neo4j, a graph database. I'm directly sending a request. So this is like SQL, but it's Cypher. Cypher is a database query language for Neo4j. There you go. So it's a Node SQL database. So this is like the database itself. All right.
Okay.
And we have a couple of nodes. So each node you can see here. Nodes can have labels, and you can see the labels in colors. So each color means a different label. So there is, for example, what does blue mean? Where are our users? Users are in green. So green nodes mean users. And then you can click on a user, and then you have additional properties. And the additional properties you can see below. So every user has an about. This is like a self-description. You have an avatar, you have created ad, and you have deleted and disabled properties. And if the disabled property is set to true, this means some moderator with additional permissions decided to disable this user. And disabling the user means this user should be stopped from creating any additional posts. Let's say you created 10 posts in the past that violated the community guidelines, and we believe, or the moderator believed, you did this on purpose. Then the moderator can stop you from creating additional posts. Does it make sense?
Yes.
And that's what we're going to implement. So what we have to do is I will show it to you in the backend. So there's our backend. No, this is not yet the backend, but the data is there. So I showed you the database. And the backend is running on localhost 4000 only if I started. So now we have it here. And there it's our GraphQL playground. So the backend is like the middleware between the client, that is the browser in our case, but it could also be a mobile client, and the database. So only the backend has direct access to the database. And the backend is responsible for doing like authentication, authorization, and so on and so on.
Okay.
So we do have a couple of users in the database. There's one user who has the email user@example.org and password 1234. And if you send a GraphQL mutation, this looks like this. You have mutation, curly brace, and then a name and some input field. Then you will get a response. The mutations are all specified. Right? So if you go to source and then schema.graphql, then you see the GraphQL schema with every mutation and every query explicitly listed, except for a couple of automatically generated queries. So if you go to docs, and then you will see this menu, and you can see all possible queries and mutations here.
Okay.
So there's also login. Login expects an email and a password, and it's returning a string, a non-nullable string. That is what this thing means. So this means I can say mutation, and then login, and this thing here is already giving me some suggestions. And then you can say parentheses, and it's telling me what I can put in here. So I say user.example.org, password 1234. All right?
Okay.
If I don't supply this, then I'll see some errors. And it will tell me what I can do and what I cannot do. So if I click on play, the request is sent to the backend, and the response will show up here. So in case of a valid login, I do see the encrypted, like the JWT. Right? So you have a JSON, then you have data, and then you have login. And the login has the string. Why? Because it's GraphQL. Like GraphQL responses always have data then the name of the mutation, this is login, and then whatever the mutation was returning. And if we have a look, then login expects an email and a password, both are strings, and it's returning a string. So the response type will be data.login. That's it, data.login, and then you get the string. There are other mutations and queries. So mutation is usually a write operation, but you can also make a query, right? So you could, for example, ask, is logged in? And then the server responds with false. Why? We have is logged in, it's returning a Boolean, and it's just telling you if you're logged in or not. And what does it mean if you're logged in? Logged in means you supply a valid JWT token. That's it. Sorry. So if you log in again, log in, email user@example.org, password 1234. By the way, what happens if I supply a wrong password? So I don't get an error, but I will get an authentication failure. Right? Incorrect email or password, unauthenticated. So you can see data now is null, but we have another key, which is errors. And the errors have an explanation of, okay, what went wrong?
Now you are interacting with the database or with the backend application?
No, I'm interacting with the backend, and the backend in turn is interacting with the database.
Okay.
As a user, you don't have access to this database here. You do have access to the front end. Sorry. Master human. So there's our staging environment. So this is like the front end. And I can also directly go to the back end. So this is also exposed to the user. But I can in no way get to the database, which is running on the remote server. Like, no way. Because you wouldn't expose your SQL database either, would you?
Okay, I understand.
Right? Okay, but the backend is accessible from the outside world because you have the client, and the client will send the request to the backend. Actually, I know some login data. So there's, for example, test2 on the staging environment, and this will make a success. Actually, okay, I was not quick enough. So I'm logging out again. So if you inspect the network traffic, what the client does is just look closely. So it's sending to /API, and it's sending the exact same thing. So here we have a query, and the query has the mutation with all the data. All right?
Okay.
It's just doing the exact same thing. Right?
Right.
Now, we want to get a valid token. I mistyped the email. So we want to get a valid token. This is now running on my own machine. In order to become authenticated, you can add some HTTP headers. So you have query variables and HTTP headers. And oh, come on. So in the HTTP headers, if this is not GraphQL specific, okay? So what we do now has nothing to do with GraphQL. This is just JWT, right? Two different specifications. So if JWT specifies if you have an authorization header, which starts with BIRA, this word, then a space, and then the token, like this, then the server is going to try to decrypt this token here, okay?
Okay.
So let's see if we are logged in. What do you think? What will happen?
It will send true.
That's correct. No, I remove the headers. What do you think? What will happen now?
You sent false.
Correct. Okay. So we, as I said, we logged in with user@example.org. And user@example.org happens to be this user here. As you can see, there you go, user@example.org. So this is the name of the user with this email address, Jenny Rostock, okay?
Okay.
And what we'd want to do is, if this user, instead of being enabled, that means this user is disabled is false. We want to make this user disabled, and then the login mutation should return false. No, not only the login mutation, but is logged in should return false.
We will prevent him from authenticating to his account.
Both. So you want to prevent him from authentication, and if he has the JWT token because it's cached, I mean it's in the cookie or something, then
Okay.
also a request to the backend should not be authenticated because someone made the user disabled. Someone with additional permissions, like an administrator, someone who is responsible for checking content for community violations. So, for example, this instance here is operated in Germany, and Germany has very strict laws regarding offensive material. And for example, if you, it's a crime to I'm missing the word. Sorry.
I understand what you mean. If you don't respect the laws, you will.
Exactly. So if you insult someone, this is a crime. It has to be taken offline, right?
Okay.
And let's say you have a user who did this 10 times or 20 times, and then you, as a moderator, you get annoyed and you decide, okay, we want to just block this user entirely. He's not allowed to create any posts anymore, because in order to create a post, guess what? To create a post, you are required or to comment. What do you think? What will happen if I create a post and I'm not try to create a post and I'm not authenticated?
You can't do it.
Right. So if you stop someone from logging in and from accepting the authenticated requests, then you effectively block this user from doing anything anymore. He cannot read, he cannot write anymore. Oh well, wait. He can read, but he cannot do anything anymore. What you would do if you're not authenticated. So you're not allowed to create posts anymore. You're not allowed to create comments. I think you can still log in.
Okay, so you have read-only authorizations.
I'm not quite sure. But the point here is, you definitely cannot write. You cannot write anymore. That's for sure. I don't know if you can still read. I think you can still read because, yeah, of course you can still read, because if we just read, so you can by the way, you can omit the query. So it doesn't matter if you say query curly brace, just omit it. This is like the default. And you can, for example, get all posts, and you say, I want all posts. Give me the title of every post. This is a valid query. And then I get the title of every post in the database. And you can do that without being authenticated.
Okay.
false. So we do test-driven development, and if you go to our source code and you, for example, you look for, you look for user management, then you see tests that, first of all, if you go to usermanagement.js, you see the resolver for is logged in. This is just, this is the backend code, what will be executed if someone is querying is logged in. Right, so it will just return a Boolean user and user ID. So if user ID is set, then you get the user ID returned. Well, basically you return Boolean. So if that's not false or undefined, this will be true. Okay?
Okay.
Now, if you go to the same folder and to the same name, to the file with the same name, but with spec.js, you see our current specification, or like we use Jest. Have you seen this before, like test-driven development, RSpec, or Jest, or Mocha?
I have seen that with the Ruby on Rails.
Nice.
Cucumber and RSpec.
Right. Okay, I will send this file, because if you did RSpec before, then it will be look very, very similar to you. And I will I will quickly go to the bathroom, get another coffee, and in the meantime, you can think of a possible test case, how we can make this, how we can ensure this behavior. Like anybody who's disabled in the database, you want to make all of his requests unauthenticated. Like how could we possibly test this behavior? All right?
Okay.
See ya. All right. Abdelani.
Yes.
So, I'm listening.
I'm just exploring syntax. So
you can share your screen if you want.
Okay.
You're not sharing your screen. Yes, now I can see something. All right. So we have on line number 45, we have is logged in, like that's the top level scope.
Yes.
And in there, for example, we're testing is logged in. And this on line number 49, we send a request to the host with a query, and that should resolve to equal. So this returns a promise. Do you know what a promise is?
It will. It's a fallback function that will be executed after getting the response.
Yes, after a result is available or whatever. So in this case, it's making an HTTP request. Okay. And on line number 49, we say await. So that means we are waiting for the promise to resolve. And this means once the result is there, we want to compare it. And we're expecting it with, on line number 50.
False.
Yes, it's basically comparing the result with an object. And the object has a key, is logged in, and the value of this key is false.
So this function is the promise.
The promise is request host query. So the promise is inside expect. So expect and then parentheses, whatever is in there, that's like the return value, that's the promise. And await and then expect promise is waiting for the promise to resolve. Basically, you see dot resolves, like that's the jest syntax of testing asynchronous methods. Asynchronous method means they're returning promises. So it's you can look it up on Jest. That Jest is like RSpec. Can you quickly search for Jest test, for example, and documentation?
Test.
It's called GEST. It's a test runner. No, GE, not I. GE. Jest, yes. And it's I think it was invented at React, but you can use it for anything, for any JavaScript, whatever. And it has like documentation. You could search for guides or API. API is good. API in the menu. And there you have, well, you have describe, test, and it, and before all, before each. You know that already, right? From RSpec.
Okay.
Do you?
Yes.
Right. So this is very, very the same. It's basically it's exactly the same behavior. And you have expectations. You have assertions. If you scroll further down. Okay, maybe you don't have the assertions on this page. So can you click on docs maybe instead of API? Maybe an API is just having the control flow. No. Using matches. Well, just click on any of the links. It should bring you to the comprehensive.
Assert.
Yeah, for example, assert should be okay. Yes, so expect, this is all about expect. And you, for example, can you look how to test asynchronous behavior? There's, for example, dot resolves. There was dot resolves. I can see it on the page. There it is. And it will, yeah, okay, so there you go. So you have expect, promise, resolve. So promise resolve is returning a promise, and you expect it to resolve. That is the expect.resolves part. So if it would reject, it will fail.
Okay.
And when you say dot resolves dot, then this will have a return value. So you cannot only assert it's resolving, it's also resolving with a value, with a result. And that is in this case the string lemon. So expect promise resolve to return after the promise has resolved to return the string lemon.
Okay.
Right? And in our test, we're expecting the method request and then host and query to resolve.
Equal to false. Okay.
Yeah, we trace it to equal with an object. Objects in JavaScript are written with curly braces. It's similar to, you're a Ruby developer?
No, I just I'm a beginner.
Okay, fair enough.
I have an idea how it works, but I'm not very familiar with
All right,
the
so
concept.
objects in JavaScript are like dictionaries. You have one word and then you have the translation. Basically, you have the key and then the value. Like one key is assigned to every value, and you can directly query. You know that.
Like hashes in Ruby.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to say. That's why I asked if you're a Ruby developer. In Ruby, they're called hashes.
Okay.
All right, now, what is request? Request is a method that comes from in a package. So if you scroll to the very first line of this file, you see that request is on line number 2 is imported from GraphQL request. So this is a minimal library that can do requests, that can communicate with a GraphQL server. And request is expecting two parameters. That one is the host. Where's the host? The host is coming from just helpers, and it's just the URL, which in your case would be localhost 4100, I think, for testing purposes. And then you give it a query, and in the query you have everything that you already saw. So can you just have a look? Where's query defined?
Query.
There you go. So you have curly brace is logged in, and that's it.
Okay.
That's a valid query. And if you're unauthenticated, it should return false. So now it's further down below. It's also creating like some users. So we have all the different cases. So if you're not authenticated, it should return false. If the JWT token is somehow malformed, it should return false, right? So authorization and then blah, that's not a JWT token. Okay. But if you give it a valid JWT token on line number 67.
67.
Then it's still unauthenticated because it's the user is not there. So you have the token, but the database is empty. That's this case.
Okay.
Right. So you just send as if someone would have known the public key. So we made sure that there is a user in the database with the ID and everything encoded, right? And
sorry, I didn't understand. You use a valid token. So why it returns false?
So let's say the user was deleted, and then you try, and the JWT token is still cached in someone's browser.
Okay.
Then you would not get is logged in true. You would get is logged in false.
But I have a question about this before each. Does it this function is executed before each test?
Yes. So for each test, we run the before each.
So it will create a user, I think. No.
It will create a user, but it will not be the user of this token. It will be a different user. It will be user with imatest@example.org. And in the comments above, you can see the value if you would decrypt this token on line number 25. So if you decrypt the token, then you see this result, and it's different from the user below.
Okay, now I understand.
Right? Okay, cool. And so this is still returning false, but if you create the user,
75
and the corresponding returns true. So now I don't see. Oh yeah, so it's creating user with ID U3, and have a look. Where do you see U3? Where is the value U3? Can you search for U3?
I think it's here. Yes.
There you go. So the backend apparently just testing the ID, and that's it. Like the other data is not relevant for checking if the user is authenticated or not. So right now it's just checking if the user is if there is an ID, and and that's it. Period. So how would we create? What would be our test case to ensure that the user is not only there, but it's also not disabled. What would we change?
So we have to check if the user is enabled. We have to check this. Okay,
It's not there, right? No?
Yes, there isn't a field about that precise if the user is enabled or not.
Exactly. So, I mean, this is a missing implementation. It will not be in the test because nobody thought about it yet.
Okay.
So that's our task now.
Okay, I understand.
But how would you create the test case? So before we had the test case, JWT token is valid, the user exists in the database, and now what?
And the user is enabled.
Exactly. So in order to be sure that you cannot log in as a disabled user, we have to do what?
To check the field.
Yeah, we have to do that in the backend. But what do we have to how do we create the test case? So to make sure that the backend works is expected.
We have to add it here, I think, no?
Yeah, what do we add?
Is enabled equal true. We have to precise if the user is enabled or not here, I think.
Yes, that's correct. But I would like to know what you would add there. Like, what would you add to the user?
You mean what to add here on this?
Yeah, on line number 78, we create
Yeah.
the user in the database, and everything that we say in the test, okay, we just need a user, nothing else. Then the user needs to have the same ID as in the token above. That's it. We don't have to supply anything anymore. So
we
want to check that the backend also checks if it's disabled or not. We have to create a user with
this this characteristic, if it's this attribute.
Exactly. We have to supply this attribute.
Yes.
And depending on the test case, so if we create a user with ID U3 and disabled true, then we expect what?
His login will be true.
Wrong, because if it's disabled, it should be false.
Okay, it's disabled. I thought I thought that you said is enabled. Is disabled. Okay.
We can do it both ways. So in the database right now we have disabled.
Okay.
But we could also have enabled, but right now it's implemented with disabled, true or false. Disabled means it is disabled, like this user.
Okay. If it's true, that means that he is disabled. He can't.
Yes. If it's true, it's disabled. Disabled true means it's disabled.
Okay.
Right? And disabled false means it's enabled.
Okay.
Right? So we have to create, I would say we have to create two test cases. The first test case is creating a user with ID U3 and disabled true, and we expect false. And the second test case would do what?
We'll try to change the value. We'll try it with false, and we will expect true.
Right. That's correct. So we have two test cases. So instead of having this one test case where we don't specify disabled, we have to create two more test cases. One is having disabled true, and it should return false. And if this disabled true is set to false, then we expect is logged in true.
Okay.
Exactly. That's the way how we do it. And I will share my screen and we will implement exactly that. Actually, I did it already. So we have user is disabled, and I just created a to-do test. So a test that's currently not executed. So I just said it to do returns false. It should just show me how it reads. Like, okay, is logged in. If it's authenticated, returns false. With malformed JWT token, returns false. Valid JWT token still returns false, but if the corresponding user in the database returns true at the moment, but we want to make more, like 2 more test cases here. One is trying if the user is disabled or user is enabled. And for one, it should return true, this case here, and user is disabled should return false.
Okay.
So we have user is enabled, oops, returns true, but then we have to specify disabled, false. We could even say JavaScript has two null values. We can also say undefined or null. Both evaluate to false. Like if we have undefined or null or false, it wouldn't matter. Actually, we can also omit it, because if it's not there, it's by default it's enabled. Like that's the default case. But if it's there, and that's this case here, user is disabled. So this has to be true. Then it should return false. Now we have a look. How does it read? Like, is the documentation cool or not? And you can give me some feedback if it's understandable to a developer. By the way, Abdelani, does it help you? Like, do you get an idea how test-driven development works?
What?
I want to ask if this gives you an idea how test-driven development works. Like,
of course, it's very useful to. I understand. It helps me to understand how it works. So I find it very useful to me.
Exactly, cool. That's very good to know. That's amazing. Okay, and now we basically. Okay, so this is in a before. Actually, we don't even need that. So we can put it right away here. So we make a function like a Ruby block. This here is equivalent to giving it a block like do and then remove the to do. So here we have users disabled. We create the user. Actually, no, it's enabled. It's enabled, not specifying disabled, and then it's false. It will be evaluated to false, and it's expected to be true. But if the user is disabled, we expect it to be false. So what should happen if I run the tests?
So we didn't. Could you return to the test? So here we expect. I think that the second test will fail.
Let's have a look. And why do you expect it?
Because we didn't implement the checking of the state if it is enabled on this.
Exactly. Like I'm expecting the same thing. And test-driven development means that you write your test before you do the implementation. So you write a test and you want it to fail. You want the test to be read. You want the test to fail, because if the test is not failing, it's not checking anything. Like at least it's not checking the not yet implemented behavior. You cannot do test-driven development if the test is not failing. Like this is what we want. So if the test is failing and the test exception is exactly the opposite of what we expect, then we created a valid test. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So let's have a look. How does user management JS actually works? So as we said, we have it's logged in and it's returning Boolean if user and user ID is neither null, false, or undefined. The user ID is something.
Okay.
And we can just say not only the user ID
and user not disabled.
We could say user disabled and say not disabled.
Not.
This would be one way of doing it, but then we're only adding it to this particular query. As you know, we have a number of queries. Like we have not only is login, but we also have current user. Current user returns a user, by the way. So current user returns either null. Oh, yeah, and I always have to provide some. So it's returning null because I'm not authenticated. If I am authenticated, oh, okay. What's wrong? That doesn't make any sense at all. User. So current user is always my current user. Just to say. So it's null. So why? Did we change anything? Yes. Oh yeah, right. Because okay, sorry, I forgot to mention that we still didn't separate the test from the development databases. So tests are always cleaning the database, and unfortunately, Neo4j doesn't have this concept of like a test and a development database. So factory clean database means not only the test data will be removed, but also the development database, and that means I have to see it again.
Okay.
So now I do have a user, and now I say current user, and I give the token, and we get okay, wrong mutation. Where am I here? There we go. So we get the current user, and we want to have the ID, the slug, the name, the friends, and the role. And there we go. We have the ID, we have the slug, we have the username, and then we have the number of friends, and we have the role, which is, it could be moderator or admin. Users just means like ordinary user. No further permissions, just a normal user.
Okay.
Right? So
right.
If we do this, we would still, for current user, we will not check this, right? So if we will put it here, user disabled, then we would have is logged in, the test would be failing, but we want more than that. We want to stop every user, like every query, to be authenticated. Therefore, we go deep into the authentication, and the authentication happens in this server.js thing. So here we say, when we create the server, every request should try to be decrypted, decoded, like the JWT token should be decoded. So we get the authorization header, and as I said, there's the authorization, right? So this is what we put in here. So request authorization, request headers will have the whole thing. Request headers authorization will have this part, all right?
Okay.
And we put the authorization header into a method called decode. And what do we do in the method decode? It's coming from here. And there we go. So we have a database driver and the authorization header. So if the authorization error is not given, then we return null, and we are not authenticated. If the authorization header is not null or not empty, then we take the first word, Bira, and then space out of it and replace it with nothing, like empty string. And we just have the token itself. Okay, then we assign a temporary variable called the ID, and then we say, let's try to decode this token with our secret. So the secret is the private key,
which is stored in the server.
Yes. And if there's any error raised during the decoding of the token, this means it cannot be decoded. Like this is like a malformed JWT token. Then we catch the error and we return null. If it's successful, then we end up here. And then we get the ID in this subfield. As I said, I told you about JWT. It's like part of the specification that there's this sub thing. This is like a must. You need always this sub. This means subject, I think. And it, depending on your use case, it is usually some kind of ID. In our case, it is the ID. It is the user ID. So if we have the ID and it was successfully decoded, then we know this user was logged in before, and it is a valid JWT token. What we do then is we try to check in our database if there is a user with this ID, and we can take this cipher, this is a database call, and also put it into our database, no problem. Right? We only have to supply ID. We could, for example, put in U3. All right?
Okay.
And there it is. There's our user. You can also return, if you don't supply this, then you get this visualization, this graph visualization of just one node. All right? If you specify the properties, then you get the JSON back. Actually, we can do some refactoring because I think this is not necessary. This return user as user doesn't make any sense. And remove this. Yeah, so we have user and we have user. Like, this is totally nonsense. And also, I think given that there must be only one node with the same ID, we could also remove the limit one because, okay, I'll leave that for now. So we changed the code. So we're going to run all the tests again. First, we clean the database because currently it's not separated. db reset, that's cleaning the database. And then we run the tests. And everything, all the tests should pass except this one little test that we already had, that we added. Just checking if a user who's disabled is not logged in. Okay.
Okay.
So what do we have to do here?
We have to return the attribute disabled to see if we to get the value of this variable.
Exactly. So the current user is around here. So if the database call is successful, we get result, then we close the session, and then we get the current user out of the records array. And this will be the first item. So we have the current user here. So what do we have to do in order to make the test pass?
To send the attribute disabled.
Just that?
No, I'm talking about the query. Inside the query, user, and we have to retrieve disabled.
Oh yes, you're very good. Because otherwise we will not get the disabled, right?
Yes.
Now, once we have the disabled,
sorry, I will. I have to 2 minutes. I will come back.
you're going to leave?
No, I will return. 1 minute, please.
All right.
Hi.
Hi.
So,
Yeah, so I made a fast forward and I made some errors in the testing. So I forgot that we have to provide the disabled in a different way. So we're not supposed to create this path disabled to the user. We have to disable the user with a mutation. Okay, and this makes sense because you're not supposed to like just pass disabled flag with once you create the user. So you have the user and you disable a resource with the ID. So you give the ID and then it's disabled. But this is another mutation which is only allowed for moderators.
okay.
So right now I'm going to fix the test. This is something you cannot know by no way that you would be able to know this. So I'm checking out the code where we disable in the seeds, disable. Okay, so we have mutation, this. Oops. Then we give the ID and we say ID 3 equivalent. Oop, no. So because there's authorization, I have to log in as a moderator, example.org, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the moderator is not there, so I have to create this user first. Email moderator at example.org. Role moderator. Password 1, 2, 3, 4. And actually, we could put this into a variable saying moderator params and moderator params. And we are logged in with moderator params. So this would make sense in a before each block. So before the test is even run, we create our moderator who is disabling user. Okay, our test setup was a little bit wrong, and I fixed it. So up here, we just create the user, that's it, and the user is not disabled. But in order to disable the user, we first have to create a moderator, then we have to log in as the moderator, then we have to create the user.
So there is no way to create a disabled administrator without disabled user without using a moderator account.
No.
Okay.
Okay, so we have these params, basically all the defaults. Create the moderator. We authenticated the moderator. Now we are allowed to disable. And we disable anything that has the ID U3. This happens to be our user. Oh, of course, we have to create the user first and then disable it. Oh, come on. Okay, let me check. This is fine. Role moderator. we create the moderator, then we log in as the moderator, then we create the user, and then we log in as a moderator and disable the user. And to double check that the test is doing anything, we are running the user management spec test. What is the content policy of the country you live in, Abdillah? Is there some policy what content needs to be deleted and something like that?
Don't know. Don't have.
What is the country you're currently living in?
Algeria.
Algeria. Do they have any kind of law regarding the internet?
I don't. We don't care here. I can do anything except if you are talking about copyright or visit. Sorry.
Yes, I mean copyright is among those things, right? If you could also disable people who, I mean, on our network you can just post. Basically, you can just post text and images. But let's say you're always copying things, then we would have to take those users down. Otherwise, we get sued, and of course we don't want to do that. So we need those moderator features. So copyright is a thing in the area.
I think it's not very precise here. We don't have we have laws, but they are not applied.
Yeah. Okay. Do you see what I do here? I just commented some code.
Okay.
And I run the tests, and the tests fail. Okay. You can see, and only this test is failing. You can see all the other tests are working fine, and just this test is failing. Right? But if I add it again, then all the tests passing. So we successfully implemented this behavior now. Cool. Let's run the linting.
What is the role of lint?
It's JavaScript. So const and let is a new way of declaring variables. What the heck? Go away. You have if you assign a variable, the first time you say let, and then you can reassign this variable. If you say const, then you're not allowed to reassign it anymore.
It's constant.
And you should not use var. Var is the oldest
method
way of assigning a variable in JavaScript. Okay?
Okay.
There's nothing to do with the tests. It's just plain JavaScript. So, for example, to give you an idea how we can change or how we can use let in different ways. For example, we have the client that's doing the authentication. We have headers. Those headers. And we can declare them. And we can change the headers at some point. For example, here. So in here, the headers are undefined. Yeah, so headers doesn't mean anything. Those headers don't correspond with these headers. This is just the key because it's an object. Curly braces means object, so this is not the variable headers. So that's also why we put them here. This is the headers. So this is like the syntax. Okay, we declare the headers and then we assign them later on, and then we use them.
This headers for the token.
Yeah, these are the headers. So headers could, for example, be initially empty, just empty object.
Okay.
Or like this. But yeah, in this particular case, we are also declaring them. But yeah, I use it many times. That I use let somewhere above, and then I change this particular variable, and then I run the test with something changed, just like a tiny thing, and then I'm expecting a different outcome. And this makes sure that your test is doing the right is testing the right thing. I also double check the test is doing anything by temporarily breaking things. So if I do this, I'm breaking the behavior, and I see that the test is failing, and that's what I expect. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sure. If I would remove this and the tests would all pass, then I have an error in my tests. Does it make sense?
Yes.
And this is like the same way. This is a pattern to me that I use the before each. So in before each, I'm usually before each. In before each, I like assign, for example, I assign the client with something else. So here we assign the client with different headers, like different authentications. And therefore, depends what I'm doing here. Yeah, so here I assign the clients with a different set of headers. And then I can use always the same method. I always use client.request. So the action doesn't really change, but the data that you manipulated, that changes the outcome of the test. And that's a way of saying, okay, just because I changed that particular data, this has the effect, the desired effect on the test outcome. So someone who's reading your test can see, okay, you're only changing, I don't know, the headers, the login headers, and suddenly something else happens. Or you're creating another user in the database, or you create a different user in the database, and then something else happens. Okay? Does it make sense?
Okay.
This is like a good pattern to write a test, because sometimes you have some errors in your test, and in the end, your tests are always green, no matter what you do, and that's not what you want. You want the test to fail if you break something, like this. So we are basically done. Let's say yes, perfect. Any other test failing? So I will run all the tests in order to check that everything is good. Now I just say git add everything, implement or stop. Disabled users cannot log in anymore. Oh, well, that would be interesting. What happens if I log in? Am I still able to? This would be interesting. Disabled users cannot write. Okay, disabled users are unauthenticated. Maybe this is more precise. Disabled users are unauthenticated. Disable user. What's your GitHub name?
Abdullani. I will share it on.
Is this you? Abdullani?
Yes.
This is you?
Yes.
You just got a new follower.
Thanks.
Come on. Okay, you should get a notification. Nice. Okay.
Yes, I received this notification.
So what I would be interested in is how does now this affects the how does this affect the front end, like the login? Am I still be able to log in, but I'm not able to do anything anymore? How does it feel like? What's the behavior now? Probably it's more cleaner to also check that login doesn't work anymore, right?
Yes, which one?
Like the login, like we just tested is logged in, but maybe it should also be tested that you're not able to get the token anymore.
Yes.
You cannot use it anywhere. You cannot use it anyways, right? So why should the server respond with the token if you cannot use it anymore? If it's basically unusable. Okay, I am a moderator. And I'm going to disable this user. So this user has been disabled.
Okay.
And I now log in with the user at example email address. And I'm logged in and nothing happens. Okay, so apparently login works, but I cannot do anything anymore. Like, yeah. So nothing happens. So I do get a success message. So we have to fix this first.
Yes, we have to show error message or something like that.
Yeah, I would say, Abdelani, you should be now be familiar enough with implementing this behavior. Do you want to add this particular test to this pull request?
Yes, I will work on that. I have to set up the environment on my computer, and we may schedule another session.
Well, yes, we can do that. No, okay. I will give you write permissions to all repositories, okay?
Okay.
So I know your GitHub name already. And we have the team volunteers. And I can add more members to the team. And I can search for Abdelani. This one. Invite. And you get write access to 5 repositories. No, 5, 4, 5, I think 4. Including the backend, that's what you need.
Okay.
Now you're a volunteer. Congratulations. So you just have to basically have a look into this test here, right? You know how to implement tests now. What you have to do is, if you go to the file, user management.spec, you scroll down until you find login.
Okay.
There you go. So this is testing the login. You see the mutation here with email and password?
Okay.
And you basically add another test case. Okay, valid email but incorrect password with a non-existing mail. This is the one. Okay. So in here, this is the test that is testing if everything is working as it. So if you get a token back, this is like the token. You have data.login, and you get the token back, and it's even verifying it. And you would have to create another test case where you do the same thing as above. You create a disabled user. And then you expect that data.login is null. Oh, no. It should throw
Error message.
Okay. Incorrect email or password. So I would say you create another test case that it's doing like this, but before you make this user the user with the email test@example.org. So this, where does it come from? Okay, so at the very top level, we create this user. So this user is present for every test case. So you just have to create this user. What's the ID of the user? So you take the user and you disable this. Okay, let's quickly do this. I'll create the test case for you, and you can implement it. Okay.
Okay.
I think it's too complicated otherwise. So turn login, and we are of our test cases with valid email but incorrect password, and we can, for example, I can just copy the whole block. Valid email password, but user is disabled. You have been disabled. Password is, I think it was 1234. So we have correct email, correct password, and the user exists in the database. And if we try to log in, we get, here you can see, by the way, here we have, instead of results, we have rejects. So this whole thing, you know this already, right? Wait, expect, and then something, and then rejects. And here's the rejection message: you have been disabled. Or basically, maybe not you, but your account has been disabled. Okay. Oops. So what do you expect if we run this test now?
It will fail.
And why?
Because we didn't implement this this part.
Exactly. Who's going to implement it?
What?
Who's going to implement it?
I will implement it.
Oh yeah. There we go. So this is exactly what we expect not to happen. And oh, we have to do one more thing. I mean, we have to disable this. So this. Okay, maybe we should do this. Now we are doing it for every test. Is this really necessary? I have an idea. We create a method, disable, and it will get an ID, and then we'll do something. It will be asynchronous, and we put it here, and it's not creating the user. Okay, so now the ID comes from here, and we can run this this method anywhere in the tests. It's like, don't repeat yourself. You know what that don't repeat yourself means?
Yes, to put to not make the same code many times.
Exactly. Now we use this code here, and we reuse this code further down with this account. Obviously, we have to use a different ID because U3 was this user.
Okay.
But we have to use this ID. Like that. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, apparently we broke our test somehow. I know why. I made a mistake, a small mistake. This is our strange factories. Do you know factory bot?
No.
Okay, factory bot is a test utility, and it's creating data in the database that you will need for testing a Rails application.
Ah, yes, factory and fixtures.
Fixtures is setting like a big chunk of data into the database like once, and then you have to use it for all your tests. And this is like not a really good idea because you maybe, for example, how can you create a test and see how the application behaves if the database is empty? You cannot test this anymore if you do it for every test, like the same set of data. And factories give you more control about what data is in your database for every test. And we don't have there's no utility for Neo4j, which is like conveniently creating data in the database. So basically, our factories are self-written, and it's sometimes like a little bit of a mess. So if you want to see how factories work, here are our factories. So you get a factory object, and then the factory object has a database connection, and it's actually using a different server where you have an unauthenticated server where you can just create users just like that, right? It's a mess. So if you run tests, then it's creating as the normal server that you would test. This server here is like your backend server, okay?
Okay.
But there's yet another server which is used for seeding, and there you have permissions disabled. Why? Because otherwise you would not be able to create users or posts or anything. Like how can you create a user if the database is empty? You have to provide at least one user, like one initial user.
Okay.
So we just disable the permissions here on this server, and we use this seeder server to create our data, and we use this server to make the actual requests.
Okay.
A little bit tricky, but yeah, don't go in here. And I just forgot to create the user, and of course, if I authenticate the user, and the user is not there, I get an incorrect email password error. Cool. Okay, this looks great. Everything is green except this one little test.
Okay. I will add this message.
Now you have write permissions to our backend repository, and you can make this pull request pass. So I will push this test and create failing test Abdelani. Return hard. The green, just say hard. Hard is good for now. Maybe, no, muscle. Yeah, muscle is great. So the build server will now be broken because we created a test that's failing. So you can see here, this commit is still green, and this commit is going to be failing. Okay.
Okay.
Right. I would say this was a nice pair programming. Did you learn something, Abdelani?
Learned a lot. It was very useful for me to participate in this session because I have abstract idea, but here I have seen them in practice.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that it is very difficult to work using TDD, but with you, I changed my mind.
It's not that hard, actually. You will learn it once, and once you have your routine, you don't want to go back anymore. As soon as you know how to do it, there's no going back. Like you couldn't even think of, like you think, how did I write software without testing it first? Like why and how was this possible? Like this will create it will change your life.
Yes.
Okay, so I would say good luck, and I would love to see a commit on this pull request from you, and welcome you as a new contributor.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.